we think of interacting elements to function as to function in systems. So, and there are different kinds of systems. So you have a fully deterministic system that's like a clock or a machine, where every time you turn it on, it will behave in exactly the same way, and the result will always be exactly the same. And for much of our culture for the last 200 years, the imagination of the world has been, the imagination in our culture of how the world works has been one of machine-like determinism, famously starting with Newton. And the idea that mathematical equations could tell you if you throw a rock, this is where it will go. Oh, if you knew everything about the universe, you would know exactly where it would go. And so the world came to be seen as a machine, and all of our metaphors, bodies are machines. We talk at the molecular level of molecular motors that drive things in cells. I was just talking to a surgeon who does transplantation at my medical center. And I'm a liver pathologist, so I work with the liver transplant team. And he said, well, I'm just really a glorified car mechanic. And I was like, no, because bodies are not machines. Therefore, you are not a mechanic. People talk about bioengineering, and biology isn't engineered, it's cultivated. You don't engineer a farm, you don't engineer an ecosystem, you cultivate them. So our language comes from this idea that the world is a machine, and that's faulty. Then there are systems that we refer to as chaotic systems, and they're related to the mathematics of fractals, which fractal geometries, probably everyone you're listening to has heard of fractals and seen pictures of fractals. The shapes of snowflakes, the crystallizing patterns, the way trees branch, that's similar to the way rivers branch, that's similar to the way blood vessels branch in our bodies. The shapes of clouds, the granularity of a coastline. And one of the things about such structures and systems that organize themselves that way is that they're scale invariant. However close you go in, it always looks exactly the same. So when you're flying in a cloud and you see yourself coming towards a cloud, it's hard to know how far you are from the cloud, because as you go in closer and closer, you just see more cloud looking like cloud. There's nothing against which you can assess scale. And so much of the world organizes itself in that way, and weather patterns organize themselves that way, for example. And our ability now, compared to 40 years ago, for how we can make weather predictions. It used to be hours in advance, you'd have some accuracy. Now it's days in advance, sometimes weeks in advance. The reason is that those systems are utterly predictable if you know the precise starting conditions. So if you have a weather pattern and you repeat it over and over again, it will behave in precisely the same fashion. But small perturbations can change it dramatically. So this is the fabled butterfly in South America flapping its wings, causing a tornado in Texas. But the thing is that butterfly could flap its wings towards the right or to the left. And one might be a tornado in Texas. The other one might be smooth sailing in the South Pacific. So the father of chaos theory, Konrad Lorenz, talked about it being predictably unpredictable. If you know the starting points, it will always be exactly the same. If there are slight perturbations, it will be different, but it will be different in a way that you can model using using fractal geometry, so you can see what the range of possibilities are. So there's unpredictability that comes into the system, not machine-like, but not exactly free and random either. When that was being studied, in the 1970s, there were some investigators, one of them, most importantly, Chris Langton, who was the guy who came up with the phrase artificial biology, artificial life. And he noticed that if you model living systems, that you can have in a landscape of order and disorder within a computer model, we're speaking sort of a mathematical landscape, that some places would be perfectly ordered, like a machine. Some places would be completely disordered, like molecules in a gas, totally random. And then you'd have other areas that looked like fractal chaos. But when you moved this mathematical probe to see what kind of order existed within this mathematical landscape, as you approach from order towards chaos, there's a zone where suddenly the computer model starts producing behaviors and actual geometric forms that look like living things. And this turned out to be the realm of complexity. It's an information-rich zone. It's the zone where life arises out of all the other elements that exist in the world. It's self-sustaining. It's adaptive. So if the environment around it changes, it finds new ways to change. And it does that by always having a little bit of randomness in the system, so it can try out new possibilities. So an example that's very common for people to use are ant colonies, because everyone knows ants. You grow up, any kid who's grown up anywhere in the world has seen ants, either inappropriately crawling in your house or out in the yard. And ant colonies are very complex, but well-ordered communities. They form food lines, they have storage areas, they have cemeteries where they take the bodies of dead ants from the colony. Some types of ants will actually farm and grow plants or fungus, and they'll have like a farm that's well ordered. And there's no ant in the colony that's organizing this. The queen ant it's not a top-down order. She just serves a reproductive function. This is all bottom-up interactions, the ants signaling each other through contact or through sensing each other's pheromone scents. They have 9 different scents that they can lay down. And out of these local interactions between each other, they form all these elaborate structures. The thing is, it's not 100% certain. It's not 100% machine-like. So there's always a little bit of randomness in the system, which you need, because if the environment changes, if the ants were totally well adapted to that particular environment, the food is over here as opposed to over there, then when the food runs out, they'd have no ability to find new food. So for example, when you have a food line, straight line of ants going from a bit of food over here to the colony over here, going back and forth, there's always a few percent of the ants that aren't following the food line. Those ants are going to be the ones that if you put your foot down in the middle of the food line, those divergent ants are going to be the ones that very rapidly find the new route that's quickest around your foot, or your hand in this case. Or if the food source runs out, it's one of those ants not in the line that's already going to hopefully randomly bump into some food and then begin to establish the new food line, so that when this runs out, this one takes over. If there's too much randomness in the system, no ant winds up following a line. So too much randomness is no good. But if there's too little randomness, there can't be a change in behavior if the environment shifts. And then things collapse because there's no adaptation. So there needs to be this little tiny zone of limited randomness that's completely unpredictable. And that randomness in that mathematical zone between order and chaos is what allows life to happen, what allows adaptation and evolution and creativity to happen. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about ants or cells in a body or biomolecules in cells or humans in a community or creatures of all kinds in an ecosystem. They all follow all these same principles. And so coming back to my equanimity, thanks to complexity in the face of all our social, economic, medical, and political trauma out here, there's randomness in the system. There's always randomness. Things are going to arise that we can't expect. And those things may be the source of the creativity that allows the system to survive whatever collapses are happening now and grow and flourish in a new way that we couldn't have possibly imagined. And so complex systems are predictably unpredictable. You just don't know. And that not knowing, comes around to my Buddhist practice. That not knowing is the equivalent of what a Buddhist would say is living in the present moment. Not anticipating what the future is, nor hanging on to the past. That's what potentiates you being the perhaps creative pivot for something new to come.
That's why knowledge matters.